Good morning, Bitcoiners. Good morning, Boo Boo Bodacious. Hello. There's something wrong with my counter here. Um, we'll give it all a few minutes for folks to trickle in. It's Sunday morning. Right, right. I noticed that the sun was up. And guess what? Bitcoin's running. All that's left to do is have a coffee, talk about what's new. Mmm. Perfect. Perfect. All right. There's our fellow participants. Hey, Dex, what's up, man? All right. So, as we know, it's always fun to start with super fake news, right? We like to start with the super fake stuff. Super duper fake. So, what do we got today? What do we got? Well, this was from the Washington Post, and it was from back in December. And now, this was right around the time of the winter storm, and that we had over Christmas in North America, if you remember. So they're making the point here in the Washington Post that all the extreme blasts of cold, like the one that is currently settled on top of northeastern United States and Canada, where we talked yesterday about the minus 107 degrees, right? That would be what you see in my, when I have the Vermont studio, also known as my living room, and you see the mountains in the back of that shot. The next range behind those are the ones where they had those 107 degrees. So it's really just like, in the view of the show. So the Washington Post here says that scientists actually say, the experts, that the blasts of extreme cold we get, right, are actually caused by Arctic warming. Okay, so it gets warm up there, and then we get really cold down here because they're sending their warm. Wait a minute. The wait a minute. The cold air. I guess it's getting pushed out of the Arctic, but isn't the Arctic like really cold right now? I don't understand. I don't understand what's going on. Who knows? Um, but that's not the fakest news. The fakest news we can find today. Assalamu alaikum. We'll talk about the head of CBD, head of CBD position for Bitcoiners at UK. Yeah, we talked about it. It only pays £60,000 a year for the head of the CBDC position in the UK. So I can't wait to see the super talented person who's going to out communicate the whole and out persuade the entire Bitcoin sphere. Like this is going to be like the greatest memester in the world. They're going to pay him $60,000, and he's going to turn public perception. So that's good news. Oh, let me read this fake news, and then I'll because Assalamu alaikum, Muslim Bitcoiner asked a really good question yesterday, or maybe it was 2 days ago. So I'll give a revised take, but a good one. I think you like it. So here's the fakest news I can find. This actually comes from a fellow named Bill Crystal, right? Bill Crystal. Who's Bill Crystal? Well, he was Dan Quayle's chief of staff. Who's Dan Quayle? Dan Quayle was the first Bush president's vice president. And for those of you who were too young, um, maybe you don't remember, but he was generally regarded as the stupidest office holder ever in the history of the United States. He would be in tough company now, of course, with what we've got currently. But he really made the current VP, Kamala Harris, sound really eloquent. Like, I know we like to take some of her stuff and talk about it here. But Dan Quayle was a real winner. And this guy, Bill Crystal, was his chief of staff. And then he became a major Republican propagandist in the 90s and was one of the main propagandists for George Bush Jr. when he became president. And he led all of that Iraq stuff. And you're for the Islamic Jihad unless you're for the Patriot Act. That was all his framing, right? He's really good at this. Yeah. Well, Palin wasn't elected, unfortunately. P Man Man says, and frankly, I was a Palin fan for simple reasons that she had that ability to come up with clever branding almost accidentally. She had one once that I still copy. It was during the initial stuff about the global warming and this and that. And she went to a Harley Davidson rally. And when everyone was talking about emissions and da da da, and she goes, with all the big Harley engines running, she goes, I love the smell of those emissions. Really strong, powerful, persuasive stuff. So people forget that she was, did we ever figure out who was Nayland Palin? No, we never figured it out. Morning CK. Here's Justin with a follow-up on the position. Anyway, Bill Kristol, for those of you who don't know, Bill Kristol, like I said, was one of the main propagandists for the GOP, the Republicans, in the 2000s. Worked very closely with David Frum and all of these. I know David Frum. I've met him many, many times and had these arguments with him years ago. He's a lost cause now. Don't even bother arguing with the fella. So Bill Kristol, of course, when Trump came out, right, had a total mental breakdown and is now more or less pushing that establishment uniparty piece. He helped run the Lincoln Project, which was a so-called Republican effort to propagandize Trump. So he's a total Trump derangement syndrome guy. And here's what this is something he said out loud, right? He said this out loud. He put it on Twitter and believes this is it makes sense. He says, if the balloon had anti-Black history messages stenciled on it, or if we're dropping anti-trans pamphlets down to earth, or if it was broadcasting denunciations of wokeness nonstop, MAGA would be pro-balloon. They'd be welcoming the balloon. They'd be worshiping the balloon. And this is what this guy gets up to. It's good propaganda, though. We gotta hand it to him. He is a master propagandist. He did what a lot of people are doing right now around this whole balloon thing, giving you a partisan take on it, spinning it, right? That's the neat thing about the balloon. It's the spin. And we talked a lot about it yesterday. One of the main advantages of the balloon story is that it's now focusing attention on TikTok, which we talked about yesterday, right? That now TikTok has become this visual thing. The balloon is really a big deal, actually. And I think you're going to continue to hear about TikTok. I think this is a good luck thing actually. But of all the of all the opinions around the balloon, this one I found the most interesting, and it's from a fellow named Arnaud Bertrand. And Arnaud breaks it down in a way that we like on this show because it gives you both sides and it's giving you the context and it's giving you really the frame of persuasion and what's going on around the story. So I'll read it to you. It's a really great thread. I took a bit of time to dissect the spy balloon story, both how it is portrayed in the US and China's response. As you'll see, the more you think about it, the more stunned you get at the sheer absurdity of the whole thing. First, the US story, right? So all he's doing here is giving you the actual official storylines from either of the belligerents here, right? So here's what he says. First, the US story. China sent a spy balloon over highly strategic US sites. It chose to spy on those sites with a big visible balloon reported as being as big as multiple school buses that anyone can see with the naked eye from the ground to demonstrate it had the capability, despite having a plethora of other more discreet ways to spy like satellites or stealth drones. Unclear that anyone doubted China had mastered the technology of, check notes, hot air balloons, and why it therefore needed to demonstrate this capability. China chose to do so on the eve of Secretary of State Blinken, right? We talked about Blinken yesterday, visit to China, where he was invited, and hours after signaling Blinken would also be meeting with Xi during the visit, a high-level meeting not granted to any U.S. Secretary of States in years. So he was actually supposed to meet Xi. The story, therefore, being that China chose to disrupt a meeting with its own president and to sabotage its own efforts at détente in the U.S.-China conflict. So that's the actual American point of view. The Pentagon said it had been tracking the balloon for quite some time and that it wasn't the first time such an incident occurred. But this time, for unclear reasons, it chose to do a public announcement. As a result, Blinken announced he was postponing his China trip. They put the emoji here, right? Now, the story from the Chinese side. So that was the American side, right? So the American side was Blinken, who even got this extra meeting with Xi, now no longer is going on the meeting, right? So there's a special meeting he was granted with Xi. Normally, that wouldn't happen. But in this rare occurrence, he was given a special audience. And the Americans now say because the balloon came in, it's not happening, right? Our Secretary of State will not meet the Chinese president or whatever, chairman. Now, the story from the Chinese side. To them, this is a fluke accident, the balloon being a civilian airship used for research, mainly meteorological purposes, that deviated from its planned course because of strong westerlies, winds that flow west to east, and limited self-steering capability, the main characteristic of a balloon being, of course, that it can only go up or down. Here's something that you have to pay very close attention to, because this is a trick always used by the mainstream media, and I'll explain it. A piece in the Washington Post seems to confirm this, quoting experts in national security and aerospace, said that the craft appears to share characteristics with high-altitude balloons used by developing countries around the world for weather forecasting. But here's what the experts actually say, right? This is the important part. Experts in national security said the craft has those same things, right? The payload wouldn't offer much. These are the details experts on balloons are giving. The payload wouldn't offer much in the way of surveillance, and it posed no serious physical or intelligence threat, according to the Pentagon. But the way the experts say it, and this is the important part, so I'm going to continue with the thread, but I want to point this out. It's really important because you saw it with the Nord Stream pipeline as well. All right. Anytime you don't hear enough from experts that really know, like that aren't political, right? Not a spin doctor, not what does it mean for the US establishment? What does it mean for Biden's prospects? What does it mean for Trump? What does it mean for Republicans? All these different interpretations. Just someone who knows about balloons, right? Just someone who knows about balloons. So you bring a balloon person and say, yeah, you can't actually control these. That's what these balloon people are saying. You can't control them, right? They go where they go. They're good at going up and down, but they can't go anywhere. The same thing happened with the Nord Stream pipeline explosion. So during that time, you had a bunch of articles. Who did it? We don't know, this and that. A hallmark of disingenuous journalism in this case was one pipeline expert. Just one. There's a million of them in Canada. Well, we supposedly build pipelines. America has pipeline people. Just an engineer who'd say, this is how they blow up, right? It's this way or that way or another way. And there were real reasons why the pipeline, I heard it from an actual engineer. One time, one did come on during the whole Nord Stream thing and gave an explanation of how it was possible. You're supposed to flush the air and pressure from both ends if it hasn't been running for months. And if Russia wanted to get it running and they tried to flush it from one side, you could get an explosion. He was saying that, yeah, there is a world where Russia could have done this on purpose, by accident on their own, right? That's a total scenario where it's possible. But you never heard those experts, right? That was one time almost by accident. In general, you never heard from an expert about pipelines and whatever, whenever anyone was talking about this. And it's the same thing when we're talking about the hot air balloon, right? Where are the balloon experts talking about which story makes most sense and what do we believe, right? Nowhere to be seen, nowhere. We have not heard from balloon experts at all, right? There's no quotes from balloon experts, just political spin doctors, right? So he goes on. The Pentagon itself said, this is again from Arnaud Bertrand, that the payload wouldn't offer much in the way of surveillance that China couldn't collect through spy satellites, and that the balloon posed no serious physical or intelligence threat, i.e. the Pentagon themselves said it would make zero sense for China to use a balloon like this for intelligence purposes when it has satellites. Kind of begs the question why they decided to make a big deal out of it in the first place. I'll let you decide for yourself which story makes more sense. The sheer ridiculousness of this nth Red Scare episode is absolutely obvious to anyone with an iota of common sense. Except, sadly, common sense seems to be critically short supply these days. And here's the important part, right? The real story is probably why this story became a story in the first place, which is almost always the case, right? And the important context here is, of course, Blinken's visit to China, which could, one can always dream, have been a step towards some form of de-escalation in China-US rapport. It was quite easily foreseeable that a story like this on the eve of the trip would have made it politically very difficult for Blinken to go. So a plausible hypothesis is that this whole episode is an attempt by US forces to prevent any US-China détente. One alternative hypothesis, much less likely, is that it's an internal Chinese forces trying to do the same thing by sending this big balloon. Unlikely because, A, China has time on its side, so it gains from reduced tensions with the US, and there isn't any obvious faction that's pulling for this in China. China, who believe the contrary, it'd be immensely risky for anyone in China to do something like this, as it'd undoubtedly be seen as an act of high treason, with grave consequences for themselves. Again, balloons like this particular one basically can't be steered. To plan sending a balloon like this from China to a place over U.S. land isn't even doable in the first place. The last hypothesis, which I guess is also somewhat likely, is that the series of unfortunate events, without any malice on either side, one, balloon deviates from course and gets in U.S. airspace; two, people see it and Pentagon feels it has to communicate about it; three, the media, wearing their usual China bad hat, decide to go all in on the scaremongering; four, political opposition in China hawks jump on the bandwagon; five, administration feels it has no other choice than to cancel the trip and doesn't have the political courage to say this is just a balloon that drifted off course. I guess in this scenario, there is in fact malice on the media's part, and that of politicians and wider members of the blob, but it's organic malice, so to speak, jumping at a golden opportunity to scaremonger. Conclusion, however you see it, the story is absolutely shameful and a sad reflection of the insane times we live in, when rather than take the time to carefully consider facts, apply reason and common sense, we instead choose as a society to incite fear and hostility. And that's everything right there, right? How can a hot air balloon story become so divisive? And I mean, even the people, knock it down, you're weak if you don't, right? When we talked about being weak for not dealing with this 2 days ago, what we're really talking is about our inability to even conjure a unified defense. I don't care if a balloon gets knocked down, right? We were putting it in the context of everything mentioned in the sovereign individual and its necessary extension to whether or not we'll ever have like the extreme extension of the abilities of a balloon, and our extreme other end, same narrative, which would be to deploy hundreds of thousands of soldiers to Europe. We have the will, the muster, the capacity, the enthusiasm to do it. I argue no, right? I argue no. So that's what I said 2 days ago, and it looks like that's still where we are today. Now, our good friend War Clandestine, who we have been, so there's a bunch of hot air. Indeed, Dave, it is a bunch of hot air. It is a bunch of hot air. That's a good one. I like it. So War Clandestine, who we still don't know who this person is, right? We just continue to enjoy their threads because of our own narrative bias. They fit our worldview, right? We're looking for weaknesses in his arguments. We're definitely trying to find if he's as we discussed yesterday, is he hallucinating any new information into the scene? Is he injecting a character that didn't exist before? Is there a motivation that makes no sense and has all the earmarks of cognitive dissonance, gibberish, made up, all those things? Still, I don't see it, right? But I'm going to tell you what he says now. And this is what I was mentioning about these two sides, right? The balloon conjuring this response, oh, we're not tough enough, look how weak we are, it's pathetic. And the other one, oh, it's just a balloon, and you'd be a racist if you're insulted by it, and what are we going to do? So War Clandestine, again, with this thread, this line of thinking is exactly what I'm trying to bring attention to. This widespread Mandela effect plagues both the left and the right. Why is it that the U.S. are absolved from even consideration that they might be involved in wrongdoing? Because we won World War II, he asked the question, right? We've talked a lot about this show, about the effects and the consequences of America's win in World War II and how it's been managed and what are the consequences and what's the fallout. And of course, we continue to believe that the consequences were the uniparty and more or less world economic system based on the US dollar, the New World Order, so to speak, that really did create a situation where there is only one money that determines almost all outcomes on Earth, and every other currency is just a reflection and a somewhat benchmarked value to the US dollar. So there is only everything games value relative to the US dollar in this old world system, mostly because of the consequences of the US win in World War II. So, and you guys know what the Mandela effect is? So I'll give you the quick lowdown on the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect is something we talk about here very often. It's false memories. And the Mandela effect is a particular brand of false memory. So we talked about how false memories can occur, right? So one of the great and easy examples to understand is playing tennis. If you ever played tennis or any one of these games where a ball is in, volleyball or whatever, right? You saw the ball. You create a memory in your mind of the ball landing in, right? So it happened. You create a memory. You saw it, right? The ball hit the line, and you argue it was in. I'm sure of it, right? But you see it all the time in the pros, right? It was in. I saw it, right? And then you go to the camera that does the super slow mo thing, right? And the ball comes down, and you see clearly out, right? Clearly out. Well, what does your brain do, right? Does it go, I still believe it was in and the machine was wrong? X. No. It replaces a memory that was real, right? It was real. You saw it. You saw it. It landed in. Now, what your brain will say is, I had it wrong. And you'll replace that memory with the new memory, right? So, false memories from the Mandela effect are when this happens with a bunch of people, right? So you can see a Mandela effect. And the reason why it's called the Mandela effect is because there was a massive number of people in the 80s who had a shared memory of Nelson Mandela dying in prison. And so when he became the president of South Africa in the early 90s, people were like, but he's dead. And the reason why the whole idea of Mandela effect and false memories, right? So what happens when a bunch of people have a false memory and then share it, just like the tennis ball, just like the computer saying the ball was out, it will actually force you or have a consequence that you'll create a false memory instead of what was real, right? So you can have these shared false memories. There's a whole bunch of examples of Mandela effect. The Ford logo is one of them, right? People have memories of the Ford logo written a certain way, and it's not the way you think it is. So go have a look. There's all kinds of Mandela effect. I'm not familiar with the Mandela effect. Yeah. That's what it is. It's basically the most scientific way of explaining false memories and the process by which they're created. Right. So this is the reason why it's more interesting is because we've seen it at scale. Once you see enough people do it, inject false memories because you had a false memory, I had a false memory. We can combine false memories, and then to us, it's confirmation that the false memory is real. Therefore, we mentally trigger an image of that thing being real, and that's why people all the time have this, false memory. Debate, not even debate, but I know for sure, right? I saw that. I believe it. I saw it. And if another person says it, that's just affirmation that it was real, but it might not be, right? It might not be. Yeah, it's so Catacomb says, is this life or is this man caught in a landslide? No escape from reality. Yeah, a little bit. It's like Bohemian Rhapsody says, right? There is and it fits into simulation theory because what it does rely on is the point of view of the main character, right? It's a point of view thing. And if you believe in simulation theory, you understand, as we've discussed here, it's the memory retrieval mechanism which makes it possible. Because the memory retrieval mechanism, as we've mentioned in Philip K. Dick, is broken. And because we all remember what we personally remember, our experience on Earth becomes totally subjective. And it is. It's 100% subjective, our experience on Earth, just like the character in a video game. And if that's the case, if our experience is 100% subjective this way, if two or three people have a shared subjective reality, it's just reality. Right? That's what reality becomes, is shared subjective realities. And so that's where this Mandela effect comes from. And why a lot of people think Mandela effect is also a signal that we live in a simulation, because the only way it would work, if we had 100% memory retrieval capacity, each of us individually, we'd notice the glitches all the time. We'd notice the glitches. And in the same way that a character would notice a glitch in a game, we would notice the glitches. And therefore, there'd be a lot of problems, right? If we could all compare notes about everything every time, the jig would be up, right? The jig would be up. But that's not the way the game is built. So the game is built just like all games, from the point of view, the subjective reality of the player, and therefore things flow out from there. So what he's saying here is that the Mandela effect plagues both the left and the right, and he thinks it's the reality created from the experience of World War II, which is what we talk about a lot on the show. So again, this war clandestine fella continues to entice our narrative bias, right? So remember, we got to be skeptical of this fella. Right? We don't know where this person came from, and they keep feeding us what we want to hear. warning sign, right? But nevertheless, we have to talk about it because it's so interesting. So here's what he goes. So even if so now he's going to explain how all these folks are getting lost in these Mandela effects and how it affects World War III, because that's what he's been calling for a while. So even if some psychopaths were to gain control of the US government, we weren't allowed to question them because of a war that ended 80 years ago. We must assume Russia and China are wrong because of their past. How about we just look at the evidence like logical beings, right? That's exactly what Arnaud said, right? We weren't able to look at the hot air balloon logically at all, right? It just fell back into its partisan reflex, subjective worldviews, and then everyone churned out this subjective worldview that was shared with others, and now no one agrees on what they saw, right? The US, Russia, China, every government civilization on the planet, all of them have committed heinous atrocities in their history. This idea that the US are infallible is insane. The US doesn't get to ignore allegations from Russia and China just because. Russia did their best to bring these allegations formally to the highest diplomatic channel on Earth via the UN. So he's often referring to the bioweapons, right? He's not saying it here, but we're talking about the bioweapons. Despite lots of interest from transparency from other BRICS nations, the US and the West ignored Russian allegations. The US and NATO have shown zero attempts at any diplomacy and just turn up their noses at Russia, despite the substantial evidence and the reality of US-funded biolabs in Ukraine. All they do is cry disinformation and refuse to offer, he puts over, sorry, he misspelled, offer any transparency. So this line of thinking that the US just gets to follow the rules just because they are the US, it has to stop. I'm not saying China, Russia are good guys. I'm saying the US have given Russia and China a lot of reasons to seek military escalation. That's the end of it, right? So now, again, we don't know. It just fits our worldview. That's it, right? And because it fits our narrative bias, we're talking about it. Maybe even just to see if there's something in it that doesn't make sense, right? Now, I think most people know. Right. Most people know the U.S. has a very spotty track record in the past whatever years. Now we can explain it away, right? There's things we don't always understand. America's made choices in places like Guatemala that we can continue to doubt, right, and question. But we don't have all the evidence. We don't have all of the insight. What we know is there are competing forces, and sometimes the outcomes are not what anyone wanted. Right? Not what anyone wanted. And we talk a lot here about how corporate structure and all kinds of ways we organize, particularly in a bureaucracy, can produce the most insane results because they're not produced from one person and the outcome is unrecognizable to a human, but the outcome can be recognizable to large groups. I say this a lot about, an easy example of this is when Biden first took over as president. One of the first things he did, and this really happened, he fired anyone on staff who smoked marijuana. Right? That like you were not allowed to work in the original new White House if you smoked marijuana. Now people said, "Oh, Biden, what's he doing? That's not that he's a hypocrite," right? I looked at it and I said, "Do you think Biden actually got in there and was like, oh, fire the people who smoke pot?" What happened was it went to some political committee and it wasn't staffed with their best. They didn't send their best to that committee, right? And that focus group delivered an answer that is unrecognizable to humans. They didn't think about the consequences in the public. They didn't think about any of those things. It was just finish your task, get this thing settled, and you'll be fine. The dude says, yeah, Joe Biden only likes crackheads. Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Very good. So, the idea that the Chinese or Russians or Americans are good guys or bad guys, right? It's often you're judging the result of a system that isn't trying to produce a result that a human can read. They're trying to produce a result that doesn't get them in trouble from their boss or that adheres to or fulfills whatever random professional assignment they were given, right? Check the box mentality of a lot of the systems we live with, right? The systems we live with don't really put accountability, especially in a bureaucratic environment. The reason you put something in a bureaucratic environment is to spread responsibility to as many people as possible so that no one is actually responsible for the consequences of the decision. That's what the politicians did a long time ago. The politicians, by abdicating power in America, by Congress shoving everything to the bureaucracy in World War II and leaving it in the hands of all these unelected groups and corporations and departments and all these different things, what that ends up producing are results that are unrecognizable to humans, just totally unrecognizable, and generally serve the purposes of whatever that structure is, right? So from there, you can start breaking down a little bit more about what's going on with the balloon in that context. And Malcolm Flex, here's another guy you should follow on Twitter, Malcolm Flex, said exactly along these lines, right? Many people, and he's Malcolm Flex is like one of these bro guys on Twitter, great, lifting weights, super jacked, keep it simple, bro science guys, right? Here's his take on the whole thing with the balloon, right? Many people treating the destruction of the Chinese surveillance balloon as some sort of newly minted degradation in U.S. and Chinese relations is clearly green in geopolitics. They probably also think Biden is selling off your SPR mostly to China was about lowering prices still. Neocons are fist pumping as if it is some show of strength. Neolibs are worrying because they think this will impact their financial dealings. I'm just sitting here thinking, I know he is congratulating Biden on a perfectly executed air mission. Now, I wouldn't go as far as this is Malcolm Flex. Like we say, whenever you inject a real scene, right? Biden congratulating or Xi congratulating Biden, that's a type of hallucination. He's doing it for fun, right? He's just trying to paint a picture. But we don't actually imagine them talking and saying, great job. But more or less, people were running ops, and the ops benefited America, and the ops benefited China to their domestic audiences, right? That's the whole subjective aspect of reality. So, all this to say, it fits into the narrative that we're following as Bitcoiners. Because the narrative we're following as Bitcoiners is what happens when you endow all these institutions with experts and people who know, and they're responsible for producing the result, and it's not an individual, it's actually a department, and we're going to come together and it's going to be perfect because we have all the brain power necessary, and we're going to, 1 + 1 brain is 2 brains, and 2 brains are better than 1 brain, and if we get 100 brains on a subject, the answer is going to be 100 times better than if it was one person, and especially if we get all the experts in one place, right? Well, this is what ends up happening. And I'm going to use a very non-political example here of what happens when you put these experts together and try and get a result, right? So this is what happens. And it's the same as national intelligence experts and all these other experts, right? This is from Joey Politano. And he's, not a politically motivated guy. He's got a rainbow flag in his thing. We are very LGBTQ positive here. But I'm guessing his politics are probably not Republican, maybe not Democrat either, just reporting on data and stuff. And he's talking about the jobs market right now. Of course, the jobs report that came out in the week, obviously all data can be manipulated and all those things. But here's what happened, right? So America's labor market was much stronger than we thought. It added 5 million jobs in 2022, and the numbers in the month of December and January were much larger than experts had imagined, right? So not even in the same ballpark, right? So it turned out that there was something like 500,000 or 600,000 jobs added in January, and they had only predicted like 100,000, right? Or 150,000. So they're not even in the same planet, right? It was totally off. Now, imagine that the best economists in America, the best, can't even project labor data, probably the most important when we're talking about the economy, more important than inflation and interest rates and all that, because if you get labor right, everything else can fall into place, right? If people are working and there's enough momentum and enough velocity of money, right? Money enters, people get it, and all those things, and we move forward, then we've got an economy that we don't really have to worry too much about. no one's neglecting in this context the ravages of inflation and individual suffering, and there's a lot of trouble still. But like I said, the one that matters the most is labor, for all the reasons you can imagine, right? You can take care of a lot if your labor numbers are good. And so the best and the brightest can't even project 30 days, one advance of the most important number going. It's the most important. They can't even get that right, right? And they produce things that are nonsensical, right? Nonsensical. And that's a good thing, right? I think it's a good thing because when we start understanding that their projections and reality are diverging more and more, right? So when you see the spin, because it's all spin, right? The Federal Reserve is a psychological promoter, right? They promote the psychological commodity of the dollar in the economy for all the reasons that we know are probably good, right? Enthusiasm and all of those things are a major component of what, even as Bitcoiners, we argue are the rails towards the future, right? We regularly, or the path towards the future, we regularly say on this show that Bitcoin's main advantage as a psychological commodity is that it allows people, and this is why people deride the Bitcoin fixes this thing meme, and that Bitcoiners can have all these ideas about it, because it makes it so easy. It's so easy to imagine the future when you put Bitcoin at the base of your projections. So easy. And that's a major advantage, because for us Bitcoiners to imagine the future and to have a vision of where we're headed is the easiest thing in the world, right? We can see incentive systems working better. We can see people cooperating better, because we basically just turned their self-interest into a collective interest, right? That's one of the big things that happened. So the advantage that Bitcoiners have in projecting a positive, visually easy to recognize future filled with all kinds of things working properly is a super advantage over the system that asks experts to now, in this case, you can imagine all these economists saying, "Oh, my hierarchical superior, the Federal Reserve, is projecting these economic outcomes, and they say it'll be like this." And so, well, I don't know. I looked at what they said in their poem, and my poem can't be that different. So I have to make sure the words that I put together that motivate and inspire people are not so far off the mark from what they said, because we're on the same team, right? But it wasn't reality, right? It was that subjective nature of reality, again, forcing what are supposed to be experts to come to this conclusion. But because they're so far off the mark, and things that are really important to us, intimately important, not just our feelings of patriotism and how's America going to do against China and balloons and da, da, da. It's actually getting down to the eggs. It's getting down to our food. It's getting down to our health. It's getting down to all those different things. And that's why so many people are waking up, because they're getting more and more intimately screwed, more and more intimately screwed. It was very easy for America to ignore all this trouble when we were just getting fatter and more money and more stuff and more movies and more TV and more social media. But it saturated us. It got to a certain point where it wasn't enough. We got bigger and bigger and bigger. The hole in our hearts got bigger and bigger and bigger, not just the hole in our stomach. And therefore, we were looking for more stuff, right? And in the end, we were left with food that most people can't afford, that the real food, not the fake stuff, right? The real food, not the byproducts of the World War II war machine, which are canola oil. And canola oil was invented to be lubricant in all the bullets and cannons and mortar and everything like that they shot, right? Leave it to the Canadians. The Canadians made all the most disgusting stuff, by the way. They're not the Quebecers, the Canadians made the most disgusting stuff. So canola oil is a Canadian invention. Good for them. The can in it is Canada. They don't want to tell you that. So they're not just leaving them fat, unhealthy, anxious, poor. They're leaving them cold now, right? They're leaving them cold because, of course, the experts, right? The North American Reliability Corporation, right? That's the one that looks at all this energy stuff. And really, they were also pretty worried about Greta's feelings over the past few years. So they were saying, "Oh, Greta, Are you happy yet? What if we close this down, Greta? Are you going to get happier? She's, as I continue to say, she still doesn't look that happy. I saw her smile the other day when she heard about people starving a little bit and saying, ah, that's pretty funny. So she looked a little happy for a second, right? She looked a little, but it looks like New England, the so-called smartest part of America, right? That everyone there seems to think they're so smart, right? They got all the university, right? So the climate activists said that New England, they didn't need nuclear. Reminded us, they didn't need nuclear. Stupid. They could rely 100% on renewables, right? They could rely 100% on renewables. So what happened? Well, in New England, the main source is oil, and they got some coal in there, they got some natural gas, they got some this, they got some that. But they said it would never happen, right? That natural gas infrastructure um, can actually create these problems, right? So, what's going on? Why are the know-it-alls? Why are the know-it-alls freezing when it's minus 107 degrees outside? It's minus 107 degrees outside there, right? That view that you see in my place in Vermont, just behind, that's where those temperatures are coming from. It's the next mountain range over. So whatever was on top of that mountain would have been like what, minus 95 or something, right? And these guys have no power. You know, there's a reason I leave there in the winter. I didn't want to be around that business. I thought I'd known cold in my life coming, you know, it was even colder on the Canadian side, obviously. And I've never seen anything like that. I mean, I've seen minus 50. I've never seen minus 107. I couldn't imagine it. So there you go. But here's how we're going to bring it all back. This subjective nature of reality, this main player character energy, this way that everything is subjective. Mandela effect is real. False memories come from groupthink and from other people sharing false memories, which could make any one of us overwrite the real memory we saw and replace it with a fake one. A new challenger has entered, and one that I continue to believe will be a major help for Bitcoin. And this comes from, of all places, Australia. You can almost write them off in some ways, right? They're as dumb as Canada. They're one of the dumber countries in the world. The whole like British thing, they're all the worst. New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, I don't even know if they're still in that gang. These are some of the dumbest places in the world. They're dumb because they think they're slightly better than America is enough just to make them stupid, right? That's enough. They don't have to say anything more than that. But some good things can still come from these places, and Australia just did an amazing thing, something that's actually going to help us. Australia has become the first country in the world to officially recognize MDMA and psilocybin as medicine, right? As medicine. So what does this mean? They've legalized magic mushrooms, right? So why is that a big deal? Now, do not take drugs. I'm not a doctor. Right? I'm not telling you to take drugs. I'm not telling you that this drug is better than that drug. If you take medicine from a doctor, I don't know anything about it, right? I don't know anything about this stuff. What I do know about is that the entire rehab thing in America is a scam. It's a scam. There's no such thing as rehab, right? What there is such a thing as is centers that will take people in and send them back out. But do you know what's actually happening in America? What's actually happening? Well, these things cost money, and they have people that go out on the streets, right? And you think this is a good thing, like go out on the streets and find someone who's on drugs, and then get them. They get paid for this, right? This is a job. This is, and many people have this job. You go on the street, right, and you say, come in, and I'm going to help you, and we're going to get you off the drugs and off the fentanyl and off the opioids and all of these things, right? Come on. So that all sounds fine, right? Don't you wish the world worked that way? Like nice people go on the street, help the people who need the help, and bring them, and there's a place to bring them, and they make them better, and then whatever happens after, there's another system to help them, right? We imagine that's the way it's going to work. However, it's not the way it works. This is how it works, and you can imagine, follow the money, right? And I'm not judging anyone involved in this, right? I'm just telling you how it works. And these are facts. I know people who did this and are involved in it. My brother's a social worker. This is what happens. They ask for payment for funds for these rehab centers all the time. We need treatment. Sure, we definitely need treatment, right? So They do the treatment thing. So they bring them there. What do they say to them, right? So the people who go there and find these people on the street, they say, come on, let's go. Do you think that ever works? Do you think, oh, we're going to get you better ever works? No, no, no. They say this: we'll pay you to go there. And they pay them. They pay these people to go to rehab. They say your life's going to suck for like 2 weeks, right? It's going to be painful. It's going to be painful, right? But that's gets funding to the rehab. It gets the person their job because they got quotas, right? They got to get enough people in the rehab every month in order to get it done. Well, how do you think this whole practice has distilled in the past few years? This is how it's distilled. This is how it works every time. The social worker who brought them to the rehab place, right? When they get out after the 2 weeks of pain or whatever, the person is paid. The homeless person is now paid, right? But they never really wanted to get off the drugs. They were talked into it, right? They were talked into it. What does the rehab person or the social worker do first thing with the rehab person who just got a rehab? They bring them to get them more drugs. It's the first thing. Why? Sign them back up. You know how hard it is to find someone like on the streets and you talk them into going to rehab? You know what your success rate is there? But once you find one, you can redo it. That's how it works. That's the system. That's what we built. All right. Why is no one getting off drugs? Because there is no way to do it. There's no rehab. There's no such thing. You've heard it a million times. Go to the place, right? Get the treatment, get the help. Sort of. There's places, but it's just trying to churn and get money. But normally they got to pay this staff, they got to pay that staff. There's no accountability, right? There's no feedback loop in the fiat system. It's just crying for more money. And so they give them more money. And then they wonder why the problem just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So now think about what could happen if it's magic mushrooms, right? What if it's like this? What if rehab turns into not, and I'm not judging any of these people. I'm not saying these social workers are even vampires, right? I think they probably tried it the right way, the way they thought it would work for years even, right? Until they realized, geez, man, everyone who I tried legitimately went back to it anyway, and they're going to go back to it anyway, and I just got to fill my quota. So, right? So I can understand it, right? If that was my job, I'd do after a couple of years of doing that, right? I could see it. So I'm not judging them. Right? It's not, oh, evil social workers. I love social workers. Anyone who's got that in their heart to go out and help people, whether or not the system is corrupt. It's like the old church days, right? How can you really criticize the people who went with churches and helped the sick people, the starving people, the lepers, and right? It's even if the church they worked for was corrupted, you can't, right? You just gotta accept that they probably at one point had nothing more in their heart than to make people better, and recognize the corrupt system. And in the same way that the Mandela effect can create false memories and even more sinister justify bad behavior because everyone else is doing it, right? Everyone else is doing it. So what can happen now though if rehab becomes this, right? Not I'll give you pain for 2 weeks, right? And then you get some money and then you can go back to doing whatever you want, but all those things. Well, what if it's so you're going to come with me and I'm going to give you different drugs. And those different drugs might say to you after you take them that you don't want to take the old drugs. That has much better chance of working than this thing where you go on the street and tell them to suffer for 2 weeks to get the opioids out of their system and live in the worst nightmare they've ever had, right? Because we know therapeutically through the mushroom treatments that's the whole thing. It's the best way to get off of opioids, right? A couple of turns on mushrooms is enough, and it's lasting. We've seen from the studies, we've seen from the evidence that the effects of 1 or 2 psilocybin trips are enough to cure your addiction to other drugs, right? Because it more or less resets that subjective view of reality. It breaks you out of your own subjective view, allows you to see other views, and allows you to see that actually your view of reality is like clothes. You can just change. You can try it on for size, right? So in politics, I spent a lot of my time with like Justin Trudeau's team and all of these people, right? And people would ask me, like, why do you spend time with them, right? Just like as a Bitcoiner, I spend time with Ethereum people all the time, right? All the time I spend time with Ethereum people. Now, I'm in a bit of a different position. I'm able to debate without taking things seriously or personally, and I understand a lot about the psychology behind this and how to manipulate. I do, right? Just so you know, um, no harm in it, right? We know. I try to tell you what the tools are. I don't use any other different tools than what we talk about here, but it's a real thing, right? And so I would get sort of criticized by my conservative friends. Why do you spend time with liberals? Why do you debate them? They're stupid and they're not going to get it. So my point was always that the only way I can try on arguments or try on perspectives, like clothes, is to be around people who are going to give me honest advice, or at least the advice that they are believe is honest. And so I would try all kinds of crazy things, like say this, say that, and see how they react. Right? See if it's effective, persuasive, not persuasive, all these things, right? And people would say, "Do you really believe that?" And I'd always say the same thing: like any idea, you can just try it on for size, see if it fits, wear it a bit, wear the idea, see if it suits you, and it's a much better way to go through the different subjective realities out there and choose one that works for you, right? You're not bound by the one you're born into. No one is, right? You can literally change. And someone who traveled around a lot, especially when I was young, that was also something that I took away from that experience, right? That you have a chance to try something new and see things a different way. And the whole point of this psilocybin, I believe, is that it allows you to this. Now, of course, I have tried it. Yeah, the same with people are talking about it. Yeah, it's out there, right? It's happening. Um, the dude says he can't eat certain types of mushrooms. Being allergic to pellets sucks. I didn't know that. I'm sorry about that, dude. I'm very sorry about that. I don't know much about it, but I know why felt sick and horrible whenever I was on. Well, they're not great on your stomach. They aren't, and I think there's other ways to administer them, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Now I live in where I grew up. It was they just go check out the cow poo that's everywhere. We did them pretty regularly as teenagers, and it's a very Vermont, New England thing, right? Like it's just sort of part of the scene. I never drank. I did. I never drank alcohol really as a teenager because we took mushrooms. I had no appetite. And I don't. I'm not a huge. It's not. They don't promote any addiction, so I take them once every couple of years, really. I'm not a big. They had them at Bitcoin 2022, though. By the way, I did take a little chocolate. You could order them from some of these delivery folks, and it came in chocolate form. Very good stuff, I will say. Just a little microdose it, a couple little squares of chocolate. Not too much, but yeah, I like a refresh of it every little while, right? Um, Tried the microdosing out once years ago. Didn't really notice any effects. Didn't care too much for it. At Bitcoin, this is a good story. I don't know if I've shared it with a lot of you guys, but at Bitcoin 2021 in Miami, I set up a talk for like a private off thing. I produce things for private folks too sometimes, like whatever. So it was a market maker, and they said we have a new office in Miami. We want to do a really great show, and we want it to blow people's minds and be so different. And then they give me their ideas for speakers, and it's like the former head of the CFTC, who I know. I did his exit interview, Christopher Giancarlo, before it was corrupted by SBF. So Giancarlo, he came to New York. I did the exit interview. It was his last day on the job. He was in CoinDesk's office at the time, so I knew him. And they said, "Oh, we would like him to come." And I said, "This is still pretty boring. Like, so I like the guy, but you said you wanted to have like a super memorable event, right? This guy's okay, right?" They wanted 2 panels, and then they had a big barbecue, Southern barbecue. It was amazing, right on the water, all kinds of fun people. So I said, "Okay, we can do this Giancarlo CFTC stablecoin, blah 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 blah, but let me 100% program the second piece of this show, right? Because it was just an hour long. It was like 30 minutes, and then party." So what did I get for the second one? I got Mike Cernovich, who is a big proponent of psilocybin. And we talked about Bitcoin and this reality frame, right? That changing reality, and Bitcoin, right? Different reality from dollars is probably going to be the result of a shift in our drugs, right? That psilocybin as a major therapeutic medicinal drug will allow people to escape one reality and realize realities are interchangeable and they can choose one that's better for them, and that this somehow would be one of the main launch pads for Bitcoin, right? We actually took the mushrooms on stage as a fun, microdose. Microdosed, not a lot. Totally capable of being there. Well, we're anti-alcohol, Rocco Donato. I'm afraid I am 100% anti-alcohol. Now, I don't know much about it other than I don't like it. I don't have a problem with it. I stopped just because it wasn't really something I was into. Now, I don't have any problem with people doing it. I can go around people that do it. I don't preach about any of it. I'm not, these alcoholics who former alcoholics who really hate alcohol. I'm not like that. I plan on drinking again in my life, but I'm kind of off right now. Right, it's not something I like. Yeah, McTimmy says I micro every other day. Good. Yeah, nice, McTimmy. Haven't had alcohol since 2018. Yeah, yeah. Beer is as old as wine. Yeah, look, Rocco, I'm not again, but understand, guys, that all even this a glass of wine. Agreed. So there's two books that I would recommend to both of you, written by a guy named Ian Gately, who was a diplomat and a diplobrat, so the son of diplomats, and wrote a book. And Ian Gately wrote two really great books. One called Tobacco or Smoke: The Cultural History of Tobacco, and another called Drink: The Cultural History of Alcohol. And they're both excellent. I mean, really great books. Another title for the tobacco book is La Divina Nicotina, the divine nicotine. La Divina Nicotina. So in the alcohol one, he gives really great frames around alcohol. Moderation is not really it. He tried to distinguish why Native Americans suffered from alcohol and Europeans didn't. His reason is Europeans had ceremonially brought it in, right? It's all about ceremony. It's celebration. It's whatever, right? End of a work day, end of a thing, even a dinner, right? There's a reason to have a drink. And usually the reason is proportionally related to how much alcohol you can drink. And that was baked into our frame, right? And he goes into the early native conversations around alcohol and what it was about and why they did it. All of them without the cultural context of celebration, marriage, whatever. The point of alcohol to them, without the history of it, was to get wasted, just get smashed, right? Let the spirits in. The point was the spirit. Right? It's called spirits for a reason. Right? They call it spirits for a reason. Spirits, right? They wanted the spirits in. And so that was a very, very different thing. But what I'll say is that a lot of Europeans, especially the French, I lived in France for a long time, they took that whole fake science. Oh, one drink is good for you. Nope. That's all fake. It's all fake. One drink is not good for you. One drink is still poison, right? It's just poison. The frame I use is it's poison. Now, sometimes I like poison, but it's poison. It's just poison, right? It's poison with effects. There's a reason why I'd want to do it. There's a reason why you'd want to take a poison during a celebration. There's 100 million reasons why you want to do that. But even one drink is poison. And from that point of view, again, I'm not a moralizer about any of this stuff. I drink. I have had a drink. All those things, right? It's never really been a part of my life. And years ago, I took it out of my life entirely, and I don't really notice the difference. I got over the social thing. I had 2 beers. I don't know, when I first got here to Barbados at the start of the month. That'll probably be as much as I drink while I'm here. So there you go. A lot of comments here. Let's see. Yeah, in moderation, of course, in moderation. Again, I don't want to make anyone feel like I'm. This is not a dry show. We're not promoting. We're not teetotalers. You know what teetotalers means, by the way? They heard of during Prohibition, teetotalers. You probably didn't know this. This is a weird fact. Teetotaler just was an expression. I'm a total tea. Total abstinence is what it meant. T, capital T, total abstinence. So total meant zero abstinence, zero alcohol. I thought it meant like you like warmed your teacup. Somehow that was the image I always had until I found out what it actually meant. Total abstinence. Capital T, total abstinence was the expression. So we got the I homebrew making mead. It's a fun process. I'm not a huge drinker. Yeah, my dad also made mead for many years. He loved it. In old New England, and I still remember this as a kid. It's gone now. I haven't seen anything. But we've got a lot of apples, a lot of crab apples, a lot of whatever. It was very normal and it's still to this day normal in New England homes to have a mud room when you enter because of the weather. And I remember when I was a kid, no one has it anymore, but if you go to a farm in New England, there would often be a cider bucket in the mudroom, and people would just take a drink of the cider, right? And very low alcohol content, but it was just something on not every, there were very few back then. I'm told in the past it was in every porch. But these days it's totally gone, but I remembered a few of them. So it was very common to make the cider. So Dex has got the 8 years. Congrats, man. That's amazing. Amazing. Yeah, mead is the oldest alcohol in existence, indeed, dating back to, yep. Alcohol, in that book I learned as well, alcohol, the Arabs were the first to invent alcohol, and coal is the charcoal they would use to distill it. And coal is the makeup too, right? So that's where alcohol, the coal. Yeah. It only smoked in ceremony. True. And it's coming back. A lot of people talking about that these days, that nicotine built America. Cigarettes were, so if you read this book, Nicotino, you'll find out that the actual cancer causing of nicotine is not just the nicotine in smoking. It's the actual system of cigarettes. The system of cigarettes, the short blast that you can inhale, the temperatures and all that stuff causes you to have the frequent desire for it, that kind of addiction. And it's actually the burning of the cigarette, because of the temperature it burns at and the temperature of the smoke, that combines to give you the cancer. With cigars, of course, you don't do that. So the cancer numbers are nowhere in the same ballpark. The cancer comes from the cigarettes and their widespread distribution. Now, I'm sure you can get cancer from chew and cigars if you had enough of them. But that part is, that part is there. In the Bible, Peter the Apostle told his son not to consume a lot of alcohol, but instead drink to get over his stomach ailments. I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, freedom of choice, absolutely, guys. Yeah, I'm not, but do you harm yourself in the process? Yeah, I'm not. Again, we're not trying to be. The Bible is that strong drink is for the sick and poor. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, could be. I don't drink often, but I play billiards if I have a beer. Yeah, no, fun. Again, I look forward to a day where I get a little tipsy again. Nothing wrong, but it's poison. That's the frame I use. I'll poison myself again one day. Dutch only ate cheese in ceremony. After we started exporting it, people got fat worldwide. They didn't have our ceremonies baked in. I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that. What about the Mandela effect and the Bible? I don't know, Rocco, the answer to that. I haven't really analyzed the Bible and Mandela effect. What I do know about the Bible is that Um, Jesus only spoke 5 or 6 times in it. So there isn't much of a Mandela effect if you take the simplicity of the Bible. Now, people can go overboard with that and analyze all of it. But in the end, the reason why, if you want to get into a quick religious talk, I recognize Jesus as the Son of God and all of those things, and I'll explain why. Um, imagine, right? We don't hard to decide who God is and what's going on and all these stories and what's up and da 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 da. But just check this out for a second, right? Jesus comes to Earth, lives the best human life you could have: a mother who loves them, brothers, family, all kinds of great things, right? Lives as a human being and then dies the worst possible death. What's the worst possible death? Saying the truth and being vilified for it, and then getting tortured for it. Right? There's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than that experience in this world, to be tortured for telling the truth. Right? So he knew the best and he knew the worst of humanity. He had a mother, he had 11 brothers and sisters, and he was killed the worst possible way. Right? There's a lot of bad ways to die in the world, but dying for telling the truth and having a political conspiracy there that makes sure you die for telling the truth, or something simple that's dangerous. So what is his message after all of that, right? His message is, and remember, only one person we know made it to heaven. It was the murderer next to Jesus on the cross. Only one person we know for sure made it, right, according to the story. And what did he do? He forgave him, right, and forgave all of us, right? No matter what we did to him as humans, the message is, I love you anyway. I love you anyway. Even if you kill me in the worst circumstances, I love you anyway, right? Which, if I'm, you can tell me about Zeus and powerful gods and this and that, and it's absolutely just because it's quieting to me and pleasing to me. But I do imagine a God who, that's pretty much the message. No matter what, I love you, right? It's the same as a parent has for their child. Even if my kids do the worst things, I'm still going to love them, right? It doesn't mean I don't think they should have penalties for it or anything like that, but it's an unquestionable love. And so I don't know anything about what happened for real, but if I am to recognize God, right, that's what I recognize. That looks like what God would look like to me, right? No matter what you did. In the most extreme case, I still love you, which mimics a parent's love for their children. And so whether or not this fact or that fact happened, I don't think really matters. If you just stop and you say, like, what is God, and you simplify it to the most basic elements, right? It could be that. So there you go. There you go. We don't need much more of that, you know. Belgians also ate chocolate unceremonially, and then the English got wind of it and started abusing the commodity, exporting it without the culture, leading to worldwide diabetes epidemic. Yeah, and the seed oils. Read *Sapiens*. Yeah, read. There you go. Read. Yeah, I do. Yeah, that is a good book. Mandela Effect is shared imagination, a collective unconscious. Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, yeah. So how does Bitcoin? Oh yeah, how does Bitcoin fix the Mandela Effect? Oh, easily. Um, our dimension, right, where we all live, the third dimension, time is the third axis, right? Time is the third axis, and in order to understand what happened when, a system like Bitcoin is probably the best way to get agreement on the thing having happened. That's what people call a time chain, right? When people call it the time chain, what they're really saying is it allows us to know that this thing happened then, and we can all agree on it. Simple things, literally just Bitcoin going in one direction or the other, right? But that's enough. And if Bitcoin was transacted then and there, and the actual ledger says it, it breaks this subjective view of reality and actually gives us something to agree on that's incontrovertible. So, wouldn't Bitcoin fix the Mandela effect by solving the Byzantine generals problem? No, that's too much engineering for my brain to understand. That's the dude who just asked. I just understand it as time being reconciled. That's it. It's time being reconciled. And if you can reconcile time, what happened when, You can get rid of a bit of the now, and tennis balls and all the examples I gave, it won't do that. It's not going to actually go into your brain and reprogram things, but it'll get rid of all this China, good guy, bad guy, America, right wing, left wing thing, right? If we just know where the money's going. All right, team. I got a family rolling around. They want to get out of here and make a bit of noise. So I'll see you all tomorrow. I'm going to be, so tomorrow's show is good. I'm going to be on the road a bit in the next, or on the water a bit. I'll be sailing over the next little while. But I do have internet, and we will be doing the show. We're just going to be coming at you from different spots for a little bit, doing a little vacation situation. So, peace.